Yes, most of the team will be staying in place as we go through community use policies. Mr. Oswald.
Again, I will go ahead and turn to Chris Garrison. Academic side of the house has been working very closely on this particular policy and the use of facilities.
So while Mr. Oswald is pulling up the item, let me introduce the reasons for the revisions. We've actually been working on these revisions for a number of years, and as I've joked with the leadership team, it seemed like every time that I felt I was ready to bring changes to the board, another issue would come up that warranted attention before we brought something to you. At this point, we're bringing you our best information based on a lot of interdepartmental collaboration, but we also realize that after living with these provisions for a year, there might be some tweaks that we want to bring back to you. But this is our best recommendation at this point in time, given the staff work that we've done. The purpose of this policy is really to provide uniform procedures for the use of our facilities such that they protect the district, our property, and our grounds while that use is occurring. And most of these revisions are designed to reflect current practices or to add more consistency to the leasing practices. The first thing we're doing here is there was a sister policy that pertained just to the leasing of the pool facility at Boca High. So in the interest of keeping the number of policies that a citizen has to go to learn how our business, we are merging those. So we'll be repealing this swimming pool policy 7.185 and incorporating it into this policy. The procedures are remaining pretty much the same. So again, towards consistency, we've added some provisions to policy 7.18 that provide additional guidance to school principals regarding what's considered an appropriate lessee. For example, partisan events are now expressly not permitted, and funeral services are prohibited, while memorial services are permitted under some circumstances. Again, for consistency, we've created a process that's actually been in place for a while. Again, this is being revised to reflect our new practices. We have a prescribed process for fee waivers, and there's a form 2574 that the school principal submits to document their justification for waiving fees. Only the district's portion of the fee currently can be waived. There are new provisions put in that in cases where there are substantial benefits to the school community or our student population, that fee can be waived by the superintendent as well. And again, documented on that same form, 2574. The superintendent's approval is also required if the entity receiving the waiver does not qualify as a nonprofit. And here's in a presentation a copy of that waiver form. We've also added new provisions, and this is where I've really been working a lot with Keith's team. And I don't know if you want to take over at this point, or you'd like me to start and you help me answer questions.
So I'll go ahead and jump in here. So some of our schools are being used over years. We've worked to really kind of clean up when we're working with certain nonprofits that are providing some extended out-of-school time. So, for example, out in the Glades, we are working with the Boys and Girls Club that are providing after-school programming for our kids. So we have been bringing to the board over time these, what we are now want to call service agreements. So we want to embed this into the language of the policy. And we worked on a separate fee component that allowed for the district to do some cost recovery of the use of the facility that went outside of a traditional lease agreement. So we have those at different places throughout the agreements that usually come to you all on an annual basis. So we just are embedding that type of language into the policy. For these programs, we are asking that these programs would be used by prime time, part of prime time. That's usually in the elementary space. If they are not part of prime time's quality improvement system, that they would work with the district to provide some training on quality out-of-school time programming. So this is usually for year-round programs, but at times this would also be where some of our facilities are being used in the summertime, providing extended learning time in the summer.
And then I'll take the microphone back over. In another arena, we had frequent situations where a local government was asking for use of a space in one of our schools for something like a backpack giveaway or a town hall meeting. And I think you've all probably seen this in your districts. And the current interlocals that we had did not envision that type of use. They were really geared towards recreational use of each other's facilities. We have a new form that's referenced in the policy that does allow approval of these kinds of events, basically not ongoing events such as a summer camp, but one-time community events that are something that we want to allow the use of our schools for. And a copy of that form is provided in the presentation. At this point, we'll be happy to entertain any questions.
And Ms. Andrews.
It may or may not be an issue, Ms. Garrison, but why, if we have a church or a temple that's renting space on a regular basis on a Sunday, why would we not allow them to have a funeral? I mean, if that's their place, so why did we add that in there? Was it a problem for us in the past?
Actually, I don't recall during my tenure that coming up, but that is permitted. A memorial service for an ongoing church lease is permitted, but there was a concern about having bodily remains on campus. So that was the piece. That's why the funerals themselves, because they involve that component. But an ongoing church could have a memorial service.
Well, what if there's the ashes in an urn? I mean, are we still concerned about that being on campus? I mean, I know it's in the policy. I'm asking why it's in the policy.
Because, Mr. Littlejohn, do you have the legal, I think there's a licensing issue. There was a health regulation about bodily parts being contained in schools.
Our Environmental Services Department weighed in on this. After research, that was their recommendation, that we really didn't have control over what procedures were used to handle that. So just in an abundance of caution, that was something that we decided to recommend not allowing, and that's been our practice for some time now.
All right, and with respect to your new Form 4, because I had a request from one of the organizations in the city, one of the city task forces, to possibly use one of our schools for a meeting. Is that free to a city committee, or do they have to pay?
So the request would come in through the city manager?
Yes.
And it's not an ongoing, it's perhaps a one-time event, and there would not be any additional costs incurred, like labor costs. Sometimes when a group wants to use the auditorium, there has to be a technician there,
right.
And in that case, they would be asked to pay for that additional cost, but
okay. Otherwise, it's
certainly something that the city manager could request.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and it's tying into some of the information that you just gave to Mr. Barbieri back on line 207 about the memorial services shall only be permitted under a lease under special circumstances, condition upon. I think we need to explain it clearly to the public. This was a big issue about a year ago, and I think I still get the questions. So it sounds like to me if the school actually has a church there, or there's a rental church that actually uses the school, this is when they can do a memorial service if there's actually a church on those grounds. If there's no church on the school particular property, there's no way they can just have a regular memorial service for someone. Is that what this is saying? Please be a little bit explicit as to what this really means so that the public can understand it along with myself.
Right. The way the policy's written, beginning on line 207, it would only be for a church that has an ongoing lease at that school.
Yeah, the question came up in the community was that if you just wanted to have a regular memorial service for someone who was an outstanding member of the community, i.e. in the Glades area, where our churches are not that large and the schools are a lot larger than some other churches, and they wanted to have a memorial service. We're not talking about with a urn or with a body. It sounds like from this new process and policy, that could not happen. Are we clear? Is that what we're saying here? I just want to be clear. That's what I'm thinking it's saying. So, and you have certain circumstances in certain communities where they may not be able to have a location, and many people feel like, you know, they're taxpayers, here's their school, they are partners with the school, you have interlocal agreements, and they've actually adhered to no body, no urn, but they couldn't use that facility for a memorial.
The other case that where the school could be used as a lease is if that individual had a significance or a substantial affiliation with the school community. We've allowed it under those circumstances as well.
So that is in here then. I just want to make sure.
Right, but I don't know the specifics of the case you're talking about. I don't know if they were affiliated with the school.
But I'm just saying in this policy, is that clear for someone to understand? Because you have a lot of people that are actually, they may not be affiliated with the school, i.e. a teacher or someone who's actually worked at the school, but they have contact with the school through the different community organizations that interface with the school. Mm-hmm. And they may be on the SAC, they may be a prominent member of the community, could be an elected official. So if for some reason you're in a small setting, i.e. the Glades region, and you need more space, it looks like from this policy, they could not use the school.
That's how it's currently
Dr. Fenoy.
I think one of the things that we wanted to consider when we were working through this over the last 2 years, so Ms. Andrews makes a valid point. The question becomes, how do we recoup the costs for the school? So if it were a lease, then I think we could maybe work in where they could lease for a memorial service. The issue that was really at the forefront of all of this discussion was, how do we make sure that our custodians, police officers, all of those associated with the event were compensated? Because prior to this event, we had no way to make sure that those people were compensated. So I think that might be a part we might want to go back and look at if it meets a certain criteria, and as it relates to the lease, that we could consider memorial service. I think initially it was the body and the urn that was the biggest concern for us.
And then to add on to that, Dr. Fenoy, there was also another precipitating event, is that there was a service for someone where we were concerned that it would draw out a lot of media and perhaps not be a safe situation. And we didn't have a way to vet that. So we do now have what's called a risk planning tool where we ask pointed questions to try to tease out situations that might not be good to have on our campuses. So perhaps we can look at that and we'll talk about it at executive leadership, perhaps.
Dr. Fenoy.
Yeah, we can look at that further. What Ms. Garrison is referring to, situations where there may have been a homicide and someone asked us to use our facilities. And again, the risk tool allows us to say, hey, this may not be in the best interest of the school district to allow such an event in this particular space. But we could bring this back to executive cabinet to really address what Ms. Andrews' primary concern is, which, in my opinion, is something we can strongly consider.
Any other comments? Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you for finally bringing this forward. So I think that maybe the document got changed since the last time I printed and read it, and so I'll follow up with you on details, but I have a few things that I do want to bring forward. So, and let me just reflect a little bit, because as I recall, when we first created this policy, well, I guess not first, because I wasn't here in 72, but when we changed the policy, which I guess was 2010, when we changed it, I was fighting to make sure that community groups I like to call them the mom and pop nonprofits that really care and work with and want to work with the children from their neighborhood oftentimes, that we did not deny them access to using the schools as the site where they would help those kids because of bureaucracy, right, or money. And what has frustrated me is I am crystal clear on the cooperative agreement language, and that was supposed to be to meet the needs of such children and the nonprofits that would help them, right? And they were to be a nonprofit that worked to benefit the children of Palm Beach County schools who charged the children little or nothing, right? And that they were vetted by safe schools. And so, and then they would get like, you know, the stamp of approval, and they could get this agreement. So the first thing was under that scenario, that didn't come back to the board. That was approved via outline processes, right? And so I just wonder if we need to do that. You're looking like that's not correct. Because what happened is the cooperative agreements changed, right? And somewhere along the line, the cooperative agreements became behavioral health cooperative agreements. And cooperative agreements were defined as only applying to behavioral health, right? And not to, you know, Miss Sally down the street who can come in and tutor the kids after school, right? And so I don't know how that change took place. So now as I read it, we're making a provision for that type of service for our children under the title of service agreements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so fine. I just want to put out there that I just want to know if they have to come to the board, and it doesn't have to be answered now. I would hope that we could create the scenario where it gets vetted and approved by whatever criteria is outlined, and all of those don't have to come to the board. But that's one thing.
That is the hope I put into the policy.
I'm sorry?
That is the hope I put into the
The way
policy.
it's written now, it would have to come to the board if
To
they
the
met the
service
criteria.
agreement.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, I guess you guys
can
take
look at
that back
the-
to your
we can take that
executive
back and look at it.
leadership, with input from legal, of course. But, I mean, I remember clearly just trying to set up a process so that folks could help our children, right? And have that eyeball to eyeball, whether it's mentoring or academics or whatever it is, but that, you know, the old lady down the street could come help with her nonprofit, right? So that was my goal. That remains my goal. This cost recovery assessment. So when I started talking to Dr. Fenoy about these issues, because this was crossing departments and everybody was pointing me to somebody else and it was driving me insane. So Dr. Fenoy said, but they had to pay for the toilet paper. So I'm fine with that, right? As long as everybody has the same rules. And so now that you've shown me this cost recovery assessment table, but I want to be clear that I expect this cost recovery assessment table to apply to everybody, right?
And that was the entire purpose, because we had inconsistencies across different organizations being charged different items. So that's what we are now using across the board.
Okay, so but I want to point out to you that on this matrix that was attached under the category C's, 1, 2, and 3, all of them say per agreement.
Right.
And it should say per the everybody here, if they're not a commercial organization, it seems to me that all of them should say per the cost recovery tool or whatever, right? I'm just really frustrated that what happens practically is the person, the nonprofit that says, I want to help the babies at Bethune Elementary, goes to the principal and says, I want to help your baby, and the principal does what they can do, which is the 65% waiver. But then the other folks, the bigger agencies, are getting 100% waivers under these various agreements, right? So, and everybody needs to pay for Dr. Fenoy's toilet paper. That's all I'm saying, okay?
But we
I
don't have-
just want consistency.
Yeah, well, we don't have any, but that is, it's 100% clear. So behavioral health
Anymore?
is different, where they would not be charged, and it depends on how they're using the facilities. But now, current all service agreements, that this fee-based, the cost recovery assessment would apply to all across the board.
Okay, so that's not how I read this, but that's okay. So I'm glad that that's the answer. And then so I'll go back in the weeds privately on this, but the other question is, I think we have to discern at least somebody needs to tell me, what is under the principal's authority, right? Versus what has to come to the board. Like, I think we need to try to automate some of this stuff. So, for example, if my neighborhood association wants to meet once a month at the school around the corner, right? Can the principal decide that? And does that have to be a lease? I mean, I just think that we need to, there's some things we need to tease out. And of course, I hope that we have a flow sheet, a flow chart with this, so we can explain this madness. So, and my last point, which goes back to the flow chart, is I think that we need to have a single point of entry. Because right now, the way this is outlined, different departments handle different things. Like real estate will do interlocals, and extended learning will do the after-school tutorial, and all that is just different places. So, which can lead to, I think that's how we got this disparity in the first place, honestly. My request is that we identify the point of entry for anybody who wants to come into our facilities and help children, whether it's a city or whoever, just so that there's one place, and then they can be the air traffic controller, right? In my world, I think the extended learning is the most important, so I think it should be extended learning. But in that example, then, if somebody approached that point of entry and they actually met the criteria for a nonprofit organization, category B, then they would be referred to the appropriate person. Instead of what's happening now is people getting bounced around. They're going from real estate to extended learning to back to the school, and they're okay. And we have 2 summer camps that have been bounced around for like 3 months now, right? And so that just shouldn't happen. And I think part of the answer is a single point of entry, and the rest I deal with offline. Thank you.
Any other questions? Very quick, just a request as we go through this is, I know that in audit citations, our adult and community ed leases have been historically a challenge. So maybe some specific attention to those as we go forward. All right, thank you very much. Our next topic is our public hearing on instruction